I'm going to invite you all to pray with me again. Pray with me this time in a particular way. If you would sing an ooh or hum on this note, help me choir. Or you can sing up here, so pick this note or pick this note. Christians, we have met to worship and to praise the Lord our God. Will you pray with all your power? Will you help us preach the word? All is vain unless the Spirit of the Holy One come down. Christians pray and holy manna will be scattered all around. Amen. The second reading this morning comes from the epistle of 2 Peter. This is a text that scholars argue about its authorship and its date. For those of you who are not scholarly types or academic types, you should know that all books of the Bible, scholars argue about the authorship and the date. For those of you who are scholarly types, you should know that the reasons they argue about that are really, really interesting, and you should read about it. Listen now to the words from 2 Peter, the first chapter, beginning in verse 16. For we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we have been eyewitnesses of his majesty, for he received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice was conveyed to him by the majestic glory, saying, "This is my Son, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased." We ourselves heard this voice come from heaven while we were with him on the holy mountain. So we have the prophetic message more fully confirmed. You will do well to be attentive to this as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. First of all, you must understand this, that no prophecy of Scripture is a matter of one's own interpretation, because no prophecy ever came by human will, but men and women moved by the Holy Spirit spoke from God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Has anyone here ever experienced a time or situation that called into question the big things upon which you had based your life? Anyone? Has anyone here had an experience or a time that shook your faith, that shook your belief? Perhaps it was a divorce where you had to face the truth of broken promises by the one you loved, or the promises you broke. Perhaps it was a child you raised or a grandchild that you reared the best you could. Discipline, opportunities, education, church. And you watched them shift away, perhaps slipping into despair or self-harm, perhaps just to desperation. Perhaps it was a career lost, a livelihood surrendered. Perhaps you've seen violence come to those and death come to those who were seeking God's justice. Or perhaps it was something less dramatic, the slow erosion of norms, the shifting of ground on which you have built your life. A set of beliefs that you expected to always hold firm. And yet they slip away. It's easy to want to walk away, isn't it? It's easy to slip back from the things that you once found to be true. Forget it. It's not worth it. It's not worth the trouble. For those of you who have had your hands up at some point already this morning, you've inadvertently walked into the context of 2 Peter. And if you didn't raise your hand, perhaps you can imagine it. This was a time after the time. This was supposed to be the glorious arrival of God's new world, the new heaven and the new earth, as it says in 1 Peter. Years and years had passed since the resurrection and the ascension, and the people of God had expected the return of Jesus to have already occurred. Not only had that second coming not happened, not only had they not seen the promised kingdom revealed on earth, things had been getting worse. If you believe the earliest date, this was the time of Nero and his campaign against Christians. If you believe a later date, then it is hundreds of years later. And we're dealing with contesting thoughts and feelings, views on who this Jesus was, without the benefit of defined doctrine, of great theologians, and the transmission of information. The author is facing a community of people who have this to say. It kind of seems like those things that you told us that we should expect, that they really haven't been so. How you taught about the imminent second coming and the things that you said would probably happen, none of them have happened. How we would probably not taste death and how things would work out for us. I gotta say, I'm not sure I can believe you anymore. We're dying out here. We're suffering. We don't have enough. We don't have anything at all. And there's another teacher over here who's saying something different, that we should just commit ourselves to the Roman civic religion and worship the gods they show. And there's a philosopher over here teaching something different about who Jesus is. That's nothing about what you said. And there's a zealot over here that, frankly, I know he's a liar. And I know he's destructive, and I know he's violent, but you know what? When he talks, it resonates so powerfully with what I feel. And so maybe we ought to follow him. Maybe we ought to take from those that are weaker than we are so that we can survive. It sure beats this whole sharing everything we've got that you taught us. These are a people struggling to hold fast to a faith on the other side of the mountain. The gospel lesson has this morning Jesus taking his followers up on top of this mountain where he is transfigured in front of their faces. And a voice is heard by them saying, "This is my beloved, listen to him." And as this is revealed, the disciples want to make this place an object of worship, or at least a place where they can come to reaffirm their faith. A space where they can pilgrim their entire lives long. But Jesus sends them back down into the mountain, telling them that this moment is something not for them to worship, but for them to carry. Something that might sustain them for faith and life on the other side of the mountain. But now, so much time had passed. And in the letter, in 2 Peter's letter, you hear the conflict that is behind it. You hear the author trying to reckon with his community. But he does some interesting things. First, he does not blame the community for their lack of faith. In fact, I think you hear that he shares at least part of it. This wasn't what the author had expected to have happen either. Faith on the other side of the mountain had grown long and tiresome for the author as well. And yet he reminds them that these prophecies and these teachings, they are not science and they are not math. They are to be teased and explored together. And he bases his certainty, his assurity, on the story itself. For we were not deceived, nor did we follow cleverly designed myths. But we saw as eyewitnesses the glory of God. We saw as eyewitnesses the light springing forth
and Christ transfigured in front of us. So I'll ask you the same question that I think he asks the people he writes to. Have you seen the glory of God revealed before your eyes? Has anyone here seen the glory of God revealed in front of your eyes? Maybe it was a moment of reconciliation between people you thought would be forever fighting. Maybe it was that moment when your dear friend, your family member, or even yourself took the first steps of recovery out of addiction. Maybe it was that moment where there was a transcendent generosity that grew from poor people and too few of them to accomplish a great feat in the life of faith. Or maybe it was when you walked arm in arm with those who were hurting, those who were suffering as they sought justice and peace in their lives. Who here has seen with your eyes the glory of God? Look around. I have a confession this morning, and that is that I have been struggling for a while now with John Calvin. Now, for those of you who don't know, John Calvin is the theological father of the Reformed faith in which the Presbyterian Church takes part. When I first read John Calvin, it was life-giving to me because it revealed to me so many things that I found to be testably true. A lot of you have probably heard that one of the bedrocks of Calvin's theology is this idea of total depravity. Have you heard of total depravity? It is the belief and understanding that there is a great lot of evil going on in the world, and that it's measurable and viewable, and that even when we, left to our own devices, are engaging in the very best we can, we still carry with us the taint of sin, a mark of being less than what God would have us be. And that we are so totally and completely dependent upon God for God's grace that we cannot live without it. Now, this was, for me, in its first lesson, so entirely revealed to be true. And I suppose that when you look out into the world, you might also believe that total depravity is a real, live, and operating thing. It is difficult to read the paper, as we have been told to do, and not see the evidence of deep evil in our society and around the world. And yet I've been having a problem with John Calvin because as I've studied positive psychology, it has been revealed to me that we reinforce the evil we participate in the more we tell each other about it. And the more we accuse one another, and the more we get on one another, the more we talk negatively about our own selves, the more likely we are to perpetuate the very evils we abhor. Justifying these decisions in ourselves, justifying our behaviors, is just natural, after all, for us to divide from one another. It's just natural for us to seek comfort in those and with those who look like us. It is just natural to be this way. What I've come to understand and read is that the more we talk about the best of ourselves, a truth that is also true, the more we find steps and ways to walk those paths together as well. And so I've been struggling with how to stay a preaching Calvinist when I know that I must bring and speak light and wholeness and hope first, foremost, and always for any of us to face the realities that lie outside these doors. And it wasn't until I was listening to the great contemporary theologian Serene Jones, a scholar of John Calvin, when I was reminded again, this truth, if you don't hear another thing I say today, this truth is that embedded within Calvin's theology is not just this idea that we are so wholly and totally lost and depraved as to be irredeemable. But before that truth, there is the truth that grace comes first. Before anything else, God's move to you, God's move to this created order is grace. In fact, Calvin teaches it is grace that allows us to even see the ways in which we fall short of what God would have us do and who God would have us be. That grace moves us. Grace reveals us. Grace redeems us before we're even aware of it being needed. And so we are redeemed, and then it is revealed, and then we spend the whole of our lives seeking God's regenerating grace, the power of grace, moving in and with us. I think the struggle of today, the struggle of our world today is not what so many of the preachers I grew up listening to have said, that we don't take sin seriously enough. I think the problem being revealed today is that we haven't taken grace seriously at all. That we live in a world that believes it's still on the hook for the evil that grace has exposed and revealed in us at the very moment that grace also overcame it. The paradox of our time is that we live as though grace is not real. We live as if the means to our best and most core selves is beyond our grasp, and so the sins we live in must never be spoken. Without grace, we are resigned to keep killing one another for reason after reason. The divides of 1,000 differences that within a few short years, I've got to tell you, are going to be seen as imperceptibly small. I was a Mennonite little kid, and there was a rhyme that was revealed in an old family book between two competing groups of Mennonites. One was a group of Flemish Mennonites who raised sheep and they wove cloth. One was a group of Mennonites who were Swiss and they had black cloth and they wore big brass buttons. One of those communities lost a cow and found it in the other community, and so they blamed them. And so they hated one another. They divided one another. They were even within the same sect of the same Christian faith, and they still could not find a way to reconcile. In fact, there is a rhyme in that book that says, "Blessed are those sheep herders who weave fine cloth, but damned are those who wear those big black gowns with the big showy brass buttons. They will surely burn in hell." None of us have access to that division. None of us have access to that level of vitriol and hate for something so tiny. Or do we? I submit to you today that I don't think we live in the most divided time in our history. I do not believe that we experience more cruelty and hatred than we have before. I do not think we live in a moment of unprecedented vitriol. I do wonder if we are living in a time where we have turned too far away from grace. We have turned away from grace as a motivating and moving power in our lives. Not simply to absolve us of wrongdoing, but to animate our life together. We have stepped away from a grace that makes us free to accept ourselves and others, free to find unity with persons we once feared or did not understand, free to live faithful, active, engaged, and generous lives, to reject evil, lies, and deceit, even when they are pronounced by our friends and our families, and free to welcome those same people back, to be their best selves alongside us. Grace makes us free, not from the experiences of shame and fear that sin so easily brings into our lives, but makes us free from reverting even more deeply into them. The truth of God's grace is that it started before the fall. The truth of God's grace is that it persisted through the cross. The truth of God's grace is that it has never one day been too small for you or I or anything that we face. The truth of God's grace is that it's been there just as Calvin taught us, as a power in us and with us, redeeming us before we knew we needed it, revealing us with an honesty that is simultaneously crushing and exalting, that we are both sinner and saint all at once. And pointing us, a grace pointing us more faithfully along God's path of justice and peace. It is greater than our shame. It is greater than the worst thing we have ever done. It's greater than the demons we seek to carry. It has got to be bigger. It has got to be bigger than the differences we assign to one another based on race or gender or sexuality. It has got to be bigger than the poverty and oppression we too willingly accept in our world as just, quote, the way things are. Or worse, that we talk about as personal failings that are deserved by those who suffer within it. It has got to be bigger than our political party affiliations. It has got to be bigger than our national identity and citizenship. It's got to be bigger than the things we hide. Than the things we hide from, or the things we hide in. Because if it's not true, no, I'm not even going to spend a moment thinking about what it might be if it's not true. Because I will stand in front of you and tell you that I have seen the glory of God. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have seen it when a community of 60 people devotes themselves to ending suicide in their communities after one of their young people took his own life. I have seen it in communities led by 80-year-old women who think that they are powerful enough and moved by grace to engage in development ministry all around this world. I have seen it. I have heard it. When I have heard at my grandmother's funeral the singing of a whole family who were so deeply in tears that I can't imagine any of us were really singing. I have heard it from a 70-year-old woman who just last week told me she had not prayed since she was a little girl until that day we did a prayer workshop together at her presbytery meeting. I have seen it in the lives of a community of faith who would rather go out of business and give away every dollar they had to redeem the lunch school debt of the children in their community because they could not imagine a world in which 6- and 7-year-old kids should be in debt to their public school. I have seen the glory of God. I have seen it here. And if I trust your hands, then you've seen it too. And so the grace of God is big enough. The grace of God is powerful enough. The grace of God has been revealed enough that the bright morning star is rising. And it's rising right here. Because it's rising in